Okay, we're gonna continue with the program. Nesli Sözer is a researcher professor at VTT with more than 20 years of experience in food science. She's currently leading multiple large projects focused on plant and microbial proteins, meat and dairy alternatives. Please, Nesli.
Thank you very much. And I belong to that age group that now I need to switch to these glasses and I will not see you. So my looks might be a little bit different, but bear with me because I need to see what is coming in each slide. So, okay, so I will be introducing actually a new knowledge and innovation network which we just very recently in June kick-started. Napkin, Nordic Alternative Protein Knowledge and Innovation Network. But before I go there, I would be giving more perspective from the EU side, and then also the Finnish way of doing things, and then we move to the Nordic network. So in 2023, it was a breaking point for protein diversification. We collaborate as VTT heavily with one of the knowledge and innovation clusters funded by EU, EIT Food, and we have established a protein diversification think tank. And one of the first seeds that came out from that activity was proposing the protein diversification to reach the EU's 2040 climate targets. And what is protein diversification? Obviously, you know very well that animal farming is not sustainable and resource intensive. And for that, we have to diversify the protein sources. From the land, we have to also integrate plants beyond the top three, soy, wheat, and corn. Also, there are other sources of plant proteins that can either go to pet food, feed applications, but also, why not also for human food consumption, such as insects. And we also support that. We will still continue having animals in our diet because they have certain nutritional traits which is still challenging to replicate. Then from the water, obviously fish, but of course there are also sustainability related challenges there. Algae, macroalgae here, what I'm referring to, and also other aquatic plants and insects coming from the water. Then we come to the most interesting piece. So it is fermentation-based solutions, which are actually, we call it cellular agriculture, that is complementary to the traditional agriculture. And here there are different kind of solutions that can stem out from this cellular agriculture. For example, we can have single-cell protein biomasses. I believe there was a talk from Solar Foods in the morning. So, such as the solein is a single-cell protein biomass, which can have both the protein and dietary fibers, and it's a complete protein source. Then we can also look at animal cells, so cultivated meat and fish, but then also plant cell culture. So there are also innovations where animal proteins can be grown within plant cells as well. So talking about protein diversification. So protein diversification is indeed drives the EU strategic objectives that has been introduced by Ursula von der Leyen. So the competitiveness, food security, resilience, and sustainability. So it is really ticking all these 4 boxes. Competitiveness, because Europe is leader in agri-food. And this is eventually strengthening the food security and also safeguarding supply chain disruptions, where we can reduce the reliance on protein imports and then increase our food sovereignty. And obviously, when we are doing this, this is very much connected to sustainability, because when we look at today's EU animal agriculture, it's responsible of 84% of EU food emissions, so quite a substantial proportion, but then we get only 35% of calories. Again, referring to the protein diversification think tank, so as you would see, there are different reports and also policy recommendations that has been shared, and we were quite happy that this has been well received, and now protein diversification is also in the strategy of many EU governments, many EU states. So the 10 policy recommendations that we have made as part of the protein diversification. So as an input, so we have to realign the agricultural and food policies so that there is a balance between the socioeconomic and environmental targets. Then we have to address the future protein crop needs, again going beyond the top three, which is the soy, wheat, and corn. We have to engage growers and producers in all protein diversification activities that we have. And when we look at the process, and of course, being a professor focusing on food engineering, this is maybe a little bit more close to my heart, fund early stage technologies in emerging fields, such as cellular agriculture or plant-based processing technologies. But then also what is important is how to close the funding gap for infrastructures. So we come up with all these advancements in research and technology, but then there is still a burning challenge when it comes to scaling up. And of course, we have to expand the novel food test beds and living labs. And when it comes to the use, we have provided a recommendation to increase the public procurement, to focus on sustainable diets, food labeling and taxonomy. There has been lots of discussions, especially when it comes to even with the plant-based foods, and also to build supportive food environments. Food environments is, especially when it comes to consumers, it's quite important and in the decision-making process. And last but not the least, most important, we have to multiply the public-private investments through coalition-driven funding, recruitment, and dialogue with the institutions. So how do we reach the protein diversification? Food system transformation. This is the cross-disciplinarity network is getting even much more important when we are talking about switching towards more sustainable diets and protein diversification, or transition from animal-dominant diets to more diversified sources. The look to the system level is getting more and more important. And obviously, we believe that protein diversification is the way to support the EU policy priorities in the competitiveness, food security, resilience, and sustainability. And to reach these targets, we need a cohesive EU strategy and EU policies, such as the protein strategy that Europe has put significant emphasis. Okay, now I would like to give what has been happening in the last maybe 5 to 10 years in Europe and in the Nordics, a landscape. So let's first start from the EU-funded projects. focusing solely on the alternative protein or protein diversification topic. So we have received throughout, I would say, 10 years, quite substantial funding from the Horizon Europe program, but still there is significant room for improvement. So I would like to highlight a couple of these projects. So some of these that are listed here have been focusing on early stage developments, such as smart protein, that has been looking at the plant protein-based alternatives, so both ingredient production technologies, but then also meat and dairy alternatives. Then next-gen proteins looked into microalgae, single cells and insects, and succinct chain insect farming scalability. Now we are seeing first time the scalability here. I will pinpoint this again in the next slide. And then this has been more focusing from the feed perspective. ProFuture, that has been looking at microalgae, again for food and feed applications, and Giant Leaps, which has taken more this systemic approach, and that's still an ongoing project. And this was one of those, I would say, stellar projects received funded from the EU. It has received 11 million euros funding, and with 34 core partners. So it was one of those projects that has received as a single project a substantial amount of funding. And here the focus is on quite a diverse range of alternative proteins, including microbial and also cultured meat, and then plant-based, and then create tools and insights so that the learnings facilitate the target that alternative proteins meet 50% of Europe's demand by 2050. Then, LicaPro project, this was also an interesting project that has received funding from the EU, from the Horizon Europe program. And this one focused more on living labs, and also they have generated different kind of food products. Then comes the, at least to me, more interesting ones that has solely focused on really taking this more close to the market. And these are Sulplant, which is just, I think it has last year started, and the idea is to build really an industrial facility producing 10,000 tons of Torula yeast protein annually from forest byproducts for food and for feed. And Plenitude flagship that has been funded by Circular Bio-Based Industries. Also, it has this year ended, and it has developed a mycoprotein ingredient, which is actually the same strain that has been used in corn. That's the most old single-cell protein, the most old mycoprotein mycoprotein product in the market. So they have scaled it up and built a flagship factory by using glucose syrup as a feedstock, so integrating also circularity in the production. Also, Alehop, that's showing another example, integrating both seaweed and legumes for food and feed, but showing also the efficiency through well-presented LCA and LCC presentation, and Zest, which just kick-started, again funded by the Circular Bio-Based Industries, looks at fungal fermentation, but now couples it with AI, so that a process which is really focusing on zero waste can be developed in protein production. There has been recently a very, very nice overview from GFI looking at the investments on alternative proteins in EU. So you would see that actually there is a really ramp up from 2000, starting from 2018 to 2021, and probably most of us know that it was the hype time. There was a lot of interest on alternative proteins, especially alternative meats at that time. Then it gets a little bit stabilized, and then the reason that I think this 2024 is a little bit low because this has been covering April 2024 as the screening period. But what we have seen is that it's mainly plant-based, has been funded, and then in general there has been a substantial increase, 23% compared to the previous year in 2024 in the alternative proteins space. And then also alternative protein companies brought in 63 million euro through grants from organizations such as public entities. And the growth is 137%, which is a huge growth. So when we look at it, break it down more country-wise, of course, we see that Denmark, Germany, and the Netherlands, they have been putting substantial government funding on alternative protein, but furthermore, the Netherlands has been the first country to allow the tasting of cultivated meat products prior to their market approval. But then, we have also other examples like Italy and France, which has been pretty much challenging the advancements in the alternative protein space, especially in the area of cultivated meat, but also in the plant-based side. So, coming a little bit closer to the Nordic side of things, well, we are not doing bad when we look at the general EU landscape. So also in Finland, we are one of the strong actors there. As you see, more focusing on fermentation, so cellular agriculture-based solutions. And Denmark, of course, they have been really very heavily pushing the alternative proteins substantially from the perspective of plant-based, but also cellular agriculture. And Norway and Sweden is also following up nicely. When it comes to research, there are some examples. I don't know if you can see from there, but these are, of course, only examples. Like, for example, if I start from my home organization, so VTT, we have been focusing on both plant-based solutions, but also fermentation-made, so cellular agriculture-based solutions, and we have quite a nice range of spin-outs coming off from VTT, and the recent one has been more in the plant-based side, where we have developed a technology which is fractionating in a simple and cost-effective way plant-based proteins using extrusion. But then we have Solar Foods, which is actually a VTT spin-off. Then when we look at Norway, Nofima has been more focusing on, among other things, maybe more heavy on the cultured meat side. Aarhus has been also studying, researching heavily the cultured meat and also consumer perspectives. Lund has been also, it's not mentioned here, but I would like to highlight it, has been more applying this systems approach to the alternative proteins, engaging also farmers, the primary production, and then all the way to the consumers. And Mattis has been more in the aquaculture side, so macroalgae research and then also fish-based research. Yes, now about Nordic Alternative Protein Knowledge and Innovation Network, which has received funding from NKJ, so Nordic Agri Research. And here I would like to mention we appreciate that we have received this funding. But I must also say that this is mainly on-time work and commitment for many of us. In order to create a wider impact, we have coupled it with many of the ongoing EU-funded or international-funded, national-funded projects. So the things that I will be presenting in the next couple of minutes, you must think that the funding that we received is quite minimal for that, but as I said, we have been amplifying it with our other funded projects in the space. So napkin, in short, includes all big five, so Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, to accelerate this sustainable protein innovation. And the network aims to connect research organizations, industry, and policymakers to drive advances in plant, cellular agriculture, and hybrid protein technologies. Maybe at this point, I would like to open up a little bit what we mean by hybrid protein technologies. Obviously, when we look at the plant-based side, there are still challenges when it comes to sensory or techno-functional properties, or even oftentimes nutritional properties. When we look at the fermentation-based solutions, cell-X solutions, those challenges are not so profound because you are even able to produce bioidentical animal proteins. But then comes scalability as a big challenge. So in order to close the gap between these two, and then also familiarize the fermentation-based technologies a bit faster to the consumers, and then also tackle the scalability challenges, the hybrid protein technologies and hybrid foods, we believe is the way to go. We have universities engaged, of course. We will have PhD training programs also in collaboration with, again, EIT Food. And then one of the first things that we will do with GFI Nordics collaboration to do a landscape work, the work that they have already done before we kick the network, but expand it a bit forward to engage with different stakeholders, for example, industry in the region. And our greater aim is to complement in enhancing food security, sustainability, and economic growth in the Nordic alternative protein space. So who have been with us? So this is led by VTT, this activity. And we have Matis, Nofima, Lund University, and Aarhus University, and GFI Europe as supporting us. And in the network, we will expand beyond this group, this core group, and we have already approached to other academic institutions, industry, and startups, but we will also deliver policy recommendations, and we are also hoping to get support from NGOs. So, knowledge exchange, obviously, it's quite important piece of the napkin network, developing policy recommendations, as I mentioned, and we need to get more funding to the region, so there will be also this kind of a tangible outcome coming from the network. And the network is for 2 years at the moment. And then through training programs, we are committed to enhance the capacity building and then also building strategic partnerships in the region. I would like to end my presentation by looking at home, so Finland. And 4 years ago, we have made the Finnish food research strategy. And it has been, of course, in our research strategy looking at 2035. The alternative proteins has been quite in our focus. So both from sustainability perspective, but also resource efficiency, zero waste, and then also from the innovation potential perspective. When it comes to key research organizations active in food RDI in Finland, I might be biased here putting VTT on the top. Just noticed. So we are focusing more on the technology, applied research, innovations, and of course sustainable solutions. And then we collaborate a lot with Luke, so Natural Resources Institute in Finland, which is more in the agriculture side. Finnish Food Authority, of course, food safety is central in what we do. Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, public health aspects related to food and nutrition. University of Helsinki, extensive research they do on nutrition, food safety, and sustainable food systems. Turku is well known when it comes to food tech and health-related food innovations, and University of Eastern Finland more focusing on clinical nutrition and sustainable agriculture. As I said, we have been quite efficient at VTT with 5 spin-offs focusing on alternative protein, Solar Foods, which you have heard in the morning, Enifer, which is at the moment building its first factory, producing pekylomycoprotein using side streams, Onego Bio, which is producing egg protein, bio-identical egg protein by using, again, a fungi. Volare has been focusing on insect protein, at the moment mainly for pet food and feed, but also planning to expand it to food. And then our very recent spin-out, Happy Plant Protein, is focusing on new efficient separation technologies for plant proteins, and they just announced one or 2 days ago that they have made a huge scale-up in Switzerland. But there are others than us. Haltia, Nordic, they have been adopting the hybrid food approach, so combining fish with plant-based ingredients. Biomash produces umami flavors. This is especially important when you are working with plant-based ingredients and plant-based meat alternatives. There's always the problem when it comes to off flavors or other sensory challenges, and this kind of solutions can help in closing the sensory gap and make those products more appealing to the consumer. And then MeEat has been also in the plant-based meat alternative space by using faba beans, for example. I would like to also bring to your attention our recent success related to alternative proteins, but also looking at more the biofoundries. So we have been, actually Finland is the only EU country that has been selected to this program, which is co-funded by US National Science Foundation's Global Centers Research Program. And we have 2 from this program, which has received funding, 2 from VTT. The first one is the Biofoundries and Biomanufacturing and Global Bioeconomy. This has more, as I said, biofoundry approach. And then we have 1 dedicated solely on diversification and advancing the bioeconomy, and alternative proteins is the skeleton of this proof of concept global center. So to wrap up, the path forward for alternative proteins, as being a professor, of course, I wanted to highlight more the functionality-related challenges first, because if we don't solve them, there will not be any successful ingredients. But then when it comes to also the successful ingredients, you produce them nicely, you advance them, but then you need robust infrastructure so that you can scale it up. And then price parity, functionality parity to the animal-based counterparts is quite important to get the consumers eat those products. And here I would like to highlight, this is something that I pretty much refer in almost all my talks, the 3A or AAA, so affordability, availability, and attractiveness, so that we can get stronger consumer trust and adoption. And obviously, collaboration is the key, and hereby I would like to end my presentation. And I would be happy to take questions related to napkin or alternative protein related topics. Thank you very much.
We're going to have enough time for 2 questions.
Hi, thank you so much. Sorry, over here, right in the middle. Hi. Can you go back 1 slide? Yeah, so when talking about enhancing functionality as well as attractiveness for consumers, in terms of cultivated meat, I feel like that's very few restaurants that are currently selling it in the world. But recently, and I apologize if this information is incorrect, I'm pretty sure it is, but in the UK, a company called Meatly recently came out with cultivated meat for cat food or dog food. Do you see that as a benefit in the sense of getting it at the level for dogs and cats, and people can be aware of cultivated meat and see the safety of it with their companion animals? Or do you see that as a problem in the sense of people will associate cultivated meat with pet food?
Yeah, good question, and that's correct information. So we are part of this Giant Leaps project that I have referred during my talk. And we have a work package dedicated to understanding the consumers' attitudes, preferences in the alternative protein space, and fermentation-based solutions, including also cultured meat, has been one of the focus areas. Now you will not like what I will say, because when I heard it or when I saw the results, I didn't also much like the outcomes. But it is true that our societal readiness level in alternative proteins is very low. Meaning that the findings from this project showed that in the eyes of the consumer, plant-based can have some future, they can take it to their plates if the costs and then the sensory, if it's tasty and then if it's not so expensive, so they can take it. But there is strong resilience towards the fermentation-based solutions. And still, they see meat good for them because it's natural. And all these plant-based meat alternatives, cultured meat, and so on, it's artificial. It doesn't belong to the nature. So this is where we are.
Hi. Regarding the recommendations, I was yesterday in Soleil. I wanted to buy some for myself. It's illegal. I did not see in the recommendations of EIT changing this situation. And the question is EIT actively involved in changing this situation, or?
So are you referring to the regulations or? Yeah.
It cannot be sold.
It cannot be sold, yes.
So I did not see this as a problem and a recommendation to change this.
I think that that's something that I would say that is one of the key things that is a hurdle in front of innovations, the novel foods regulation and then the path forward there. And for that very reason, majority of the startups, also our very own Solar Foods, has been using Singapore as a hub. But then I was also in an event where they were presenting the Singaporean consumers' approach, and it is totally different than the European, because they must find alternative ways of food production, because they are almost 100% dependent. So when the consumer is really pushed to the corner, then things move forward. But yes, that's a problem, and even US has been a little bit better in terms of regulatory, but now that's also changing, as you might be following it up. So that is unfortunately a big problem.
Specifically about EIT food. Is EIT food actively lobbying or working with?
Yes, we are. The protein think tank is also working on affecting this, but you can imagine it's not easy. It's not easy.
Yeah, we had only time for 2.